Bring into our coverage CNBC senior economics reporter Steve Liesman, who's helped talk us through, it feels like 11 months, but it's really only been about 7 days. Just jump in where Stephanie has left off at both what you've covered for us every day, which is the day-to-day reactions to the utterances from Trump and the people around him, as well as his pretty quick work in undermining confidence in the structural elements of our economic strength.
Yeah, so I think you can see that in exactly what Stephanie's talking about. We have a thing in Wall Street they call the flight to safety trade. When the world gets weird, people come to the United States. They buy U.S. assets, they buy bonds, they buy the dollar, they buy stocks. That didn't happen this time around. What happened is bonds sold off, which is the reason why the yield rose. Stocks sell off, and the dollar actually depreciated. So the question becomes, is the U.S. still the world's safe haven? And right now, there's a question as to whether or not that's true. If you think, and we've talked about this, Nicole, this week, they send us their dollars that we sent them. They invest back in our country, back in our economy. Well, that dollar flow has now been, well, pretty well cut off, especially from places like China. It's made more difficult from everywhere around the world. So the question is, are they going to continue to buy our bonds? How are we going to finance our deficit? We can do it, but we will do it at a higher price. And there's two things that I think are happening. One is a direct effect of these higher tariffs and what they do to world and global trade flows. The other one is confidence. When you go back to how this reciprocal trade formula was created, I'm calling it the penguin formula because it's the formula that included an island with penguins on it. Well, here's what we know. We know the Treasury Department, they came up with a bunch of ideas they've been working on for several months about what the reciprocal tariffs ought to look like. They might have been in the single digits. We never actually saw them. The reason we didn't see them because Donald Trump ignored it in favor of this crazy formula that put these unbelievably high tariffs on other countries. He got rid of some of that. He kept this piece on China in there. And so, the idea that America is now proceeding to make economic policy in a considered and deliberate way is kind of out the window. You heard the White House press spokesman say, trust in Donald Trump. Well, I'm sorry, but trust the dear leader is not an economic policy.
Steve, for better and for worse, the smartest people in the country don't always go into politics and government. They come through politics and government, but a lot of them go and run the kinds of companies that you and Steph and Jillian cover. They're really, really, really smart people. And people less smart than them, people like me, warned for many, many years that maybe we should peek at what happened in the early years of Orban's rule of Hungary. And Steph and I did some reporting, months of reporting, to see if anyone had locked young analysts in padded rooms and taken their phones and looked at the early years of Orban's rule, how long it took to destabilize confidence, not in the day-to-day economy, but in the underlying structural economy. How long does an oligarchy or an autocracy have to be in place before it starts to impact your economic standing in the world? And either nobody did it or nobody would admit they did it. Is anyone doing that now, to your knowledge?
I don't think so. We do have some examples. I mean, I spent 6 years in Russia following that and watched what was initially in the early 90s a promise of a turn of a communist country into something like a capitalist democracy. That kind of faded relatively quickly. The United States has a lot going for it, Nicole, in terms of the depth of its capital markets, in terms of the companies that we have, some of the greatest companies in the world. So I don't think it's disintegrated overnight. I think it would happen over time. It was interesting. Scott Bessent on our air earlier this week said, I did not create that formula that we talked about. So there's a way for them to get it back if they want to proceed in a deliberate way. I mean, you could come up with a reciprocal trade formula. I think it would be panned, but it would be defensible. That would be the key. I don't know how long it takes to get rid of it, but the trust can go very quickly. Right now, if you're a money manager of money to invest, you still can't ignore the United States. We still have the deepest, most liquid markets. I will tell you there's one thing on my mind, Nicole. It's the following. You were talking earlier about whether or not the president could, in a tweet or something like that, change the narrative. I worry that you get to a point where it's not just the president that's needed to change the narrative. It's something bigger, a reaction from the Federal Reserve, a coordinated global central bank situation where things start to spiral. That's what everybody is on the edge of their seat about, that you get into a kind of a crisis mode. We don't appear to be there now. The trade appears to be normal, appears to be functional. It is down, but it's not out of control. That's what I worry about, that it would spiral. I know that's what the Federal Reserve worries about. I imagine the Treasury Department is watching that as well.